Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to another episode of Soul Over Matter podcast. I'm your host, Michelle, and today we have on Stephanie Lyra Lin, who is a dear soul sister, as well as a spiritual coach and healing guide for women. So, Stephanie, welcome to Soul Over Matter. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you and just have you share your wisdom and your knowledge with my audience and whoever else drops into this podcast. So, yeah, let's begin with your story. How did you get to where you are today? And you can edit, you can share any tidbits that you feel will be resonant for the viewers.
Okay. Well, I was born in Manhattan. We moved to Staten Island when I was 2 years old. My parents are from Hong Kong and Taiwan. They met in New York, I think in their late 20s, early 30s. And as far as like my spiritual path, my dad started going to a Buddhist meditation center in Queens when I was about 6. And he was always interested in spirituality too, like from when I was young up until I guess now. So he started going to the meditation center, and there was a Chan master. And Chan is the equivalent of Zen. It's the same character. Japanese Zen tradition of Buddhism comes from China, and in China they call it Chan Buddhism, and it's a focus on meditation techniques basically to awaken. So there was a Chan meditation teacher from Taiwan who was splitting his time between New York and Taiwan, and he started, teaching. They built like a very little center there. And so he and like his monk and nun disciples were teaching just the community, mostly Taiwanese Americans. And so there was like a children's room. We would go in the children's room, but we would come out for lunch. And it was pretty traditional, like they would do meditation, they would have Dharma talks, they would do like certain like celebratory days, like days dedicated to Guanyin Bodhisattva, to the medicine Buddha, chanting different sutras. There's different Buddhist holidays. So I was kind of like in that atmosphere from a young age. And I remember having a connection, like really feeling connected to it even then, like trying to like put my hand in like different mudras and like chanting Guanyin's name from a very young age, chanting her mantra, Om Mani Padme Hung. In Chinese, it would sound more like Om Mani Padme Hung, Om Mani Padme Hung, Om Mani Padme Hung. So I would chant that like from a young age. And yeah, and then I think when I became a teenager, like I lost it, like I wasn't interested anymore, kind of faded away for a few years. And then when I was 18 and went to college, I ended up picking up a Buddhism course, Indian Buddhism, like not even on purpose. Like I had to drop one course, and that was like the only one available. And then I started being exposed to these Buddhist teachings again. And I was like so into it. I was like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. This feels so right. It sounds familiar. It's like music to my soul. And I just like, I really felt like enlivened by the teachings. And then I majored in East Asian studies so I could continue to study Buddhism. Freshman year, I went on a tour in Japan to Buddhist sites. Like my department had gotten a big grant from the Freeman Foundation. So I was able to do that. I was able to live in China for a whole year. And then senior year, after I graduated, there was another Taiwanese organization that was sponsoring American college students to go live in a monastery for a month. So I was able to do that. And then the following summer, I went again for another month as a staff. And I was really into Buddhism. I was really into meditation. I was really, just steeped in it. And then I eventually chose to apply to graduate schools to continue studying Buddhism. and I got into Columbia, their PhD program, which included the master's. So I went 7 years through that program. I didn't
Wow.
complete the PhD, but pretty much everything but. So 2 masters within that program, and a lot of traveling, also a lot of studying of Buddhist texts, Chinese and Japanese language. Yeah, it was like a beautiful journey steeped in Buddhism. Yeah. And
Mm.
then things took a turn in 2013 when I was in Taiwan and I came in touch with ayahuasca. And that's when I journeyed with her for the first time. And then over a course of 6 months, I did about 8 ceremonies. And that's when my perception expanded beyond just the realm of Buddhism and the vocabulary of Buddhism and the concepts and ideas in the Buddhist pantheon and in the Buddhist, you know, every I think spiritual tradition has its own language and culture and practices. And up until that point, I was totally steeped in the Buddhist tradition. Once I came in touch with ayahuasca, then I was connected to the Shipibo lineage because that's where the shamanic practitioner had been trained in. And also what I was experiencing in the ceremonies was opening me up to like the angelic realm. And it
Mm.
was also opening me up to like the human collective on this planet in particular and our ascension journey. So I started tapping into that. And then from there, I connected with a few channeled guides, like Cryon was my first channeled guide that I connected with. And he actually eventually was part of my decision to live in Israel. It's funny, we're recording this when there's so much going on in that region right now. But I had met a Israeli man in Taiwan who would eventually be my partner for almost 6 years. And I made a decision at some point to move to Israel. And I stayed there
Mm.
for 3 years. And Cryon was actually part of that because he actually talks a lot about the Jewish people. Interestingly, he's channeled on so many topics about the earth and human collective, but he also talks about the Jews as well. And he is channeled by a man named Lee Carroll. And when I was living in Israel, Lee Carroll came. And so I was at one of the events where Cryon was channeled. Do you know Cryon?
I've heard of him, but I haven't really tapped into, yeah, the energy. I haven't like researched or looked into it, but I've heard the name sounds familiar.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. So my world opened up from there in 2013 and sort of expanded beyond Buddhism, but still continues to this day be Buddhism is still a big part of my life. In fact, these months and couple of years, I've been feeling like a call to go back to those roots. Yeah.
Mm. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. So from a young age, you were around spirituality, you were tapped in. So you feel like you didn't really have an awakening per se, like it's always been within you.
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, although 2013 did feel like a turning point in terms of an awakening, like sometimes I would call that an awakening time because it connected me. Like I guess that's what plant medicine has the ability to do because of the nature of plants. Like so I felt much more of a connection viscerally in my whole body. And like auric field also like to the collective. Like it wasn't just conceptual anymore. As far as like the human journey, I mean, Buddhism talks a lot about like the bodhisattva path. And I did feel that in my heart also. But with ayahuasca, there was something energetic like that I was tapped into in a much stronger way
Mm.
through those ceremonies.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, 'cause we are nature, right? So
Mhm.
living in big cities like you and I are from New York, it's like, and then you start to awaken or you start to really tap in or yeah, go through plant journeys and it's like, wow, we literally are the plant. The plant is us, right? It's like we are just
Mhm.
connecting at a deeper level and then yeah, it clears away the
Mhm.
things that no longer serve us, right? Or like it unveils us, right? Because we're born with that veil. right? So we forget to remember in this lifetime. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's really beautiful. And then, so you were in Israel, you said, and then you started, then you started teaching. What were your studies after Israel?
Okay, so it was in Taiwan that I connected with ayahuasca. Then I eventually moved to Israel, and that's where I started coaching, and offering healing work as well. And that went right along with my personal journey. Like
Of
I had
course.
just trained in coaching. Yeah, exactly. I had trained in coaching. I had been doing inner child work and shadow work and connecting with teachers like through the internet, like who would give me sessions, but also a lot of YouTube learning. Teal Swan was a huge influence in my early years. Um, I would say she was probably the biggest one in those early
Mm,
years, as well as Cryon, Bashar. There was also this this YouTube channel called Channeling Eric with a K. I learned a lot from the channelings there also. And I trained in life coaching with Brooke Castillo of the Life Coach School. Um, and then I also got my Reiki training around that same time. And family constellations. I started tapping into that. So it all happens like 2013 to 20, 14, 15 was when I was learning a lot and starting to work with people also in Israel in person.
wow. Wow, a
Okay.
lot of information. You were like on that
Yeah.
highway train of just like, I think that happens, right? When we awaken or when we're like really starting to tap in. It's like we're sponges, right? It's like just give me all the information,
Yes.
even though it's within us, right? But it's like we're having to remember
Yeah.
and decode. Yeah. Can
Mhm.
you talk more about family constellations and
Mhm. Sure.
what that is, what it entails?
Mhm. Yeah. So Family Constellations was developed by a German man named Bert Hellinger. He was a missionary, I believe, in Africa, one of the countries where I think it's the Zulu tribe lives. I
Mm,
don't know if they span a few countries or what. But he studied them for a few years and he wanted to understand how like they stay cohesive, as a community. And so I think from that and from maybe other downloads he was getting, he started to come up with this theory that the family is a system, like a constellation. And when everyone is in their right order and their proper place, then the flow of energy and the flow of love can move smoothly. But when there are different events that occur that create trauma and shock that is unresolved in the family system, then the flow of love gets blocked or broken. And then family members start to get out of order. So, like, let's say there's the early death of a mother, right? And now there's the siblings left, and maybe the father left has survived. But now, maybe because there's not enough resources in the community or material resources as well to sort of keep that flow of love going, then maybe one of the children, will then take on the position of the deceased mother. And then that's when something gets out of order because the child can never really take the place of the mother because the child is the child and the parent is the parent. But when these events occur and it becomes traumatic because of the lack of resources, then family members will try to compensate, for what was lost. But that actually creates disharmony. And that disharmony, if it's not rectified at that generational level, will get passed down to the next generations. Everything sort of gets out of order, out of whack. And so the purpose of the constellation is to put up the family and look at it as a system and see what has happened here, who's out of place, also who is missing. So sometimes when there's great tragedy, a whole family in their memory, they will try to block out the loss of someone. Or if there's a war or murder, they'll try to block out that entire thing. But the thing is, when these traumatic events occur, everyone has to be included, including during wars or murders or crimes. Even the perpetrator is now bonded to the family, and they have to be included. If you throw that person out and pretend they don't exist, or try to repress that energy, someone in a later generation is actually going to take on the energy of that perpetrator.
Oh,
yes, you will see it play out in the constellations. Yeah. So that's why this practice is meant to really look soberly at what has occurred in the family and bring acknowledgement to those events and return everyone to their proper place through this process of acknowledgement. So it's not a lot of story, like we pretty much stick to the facts and the events that occurred. We give everyone back their proper place. Like we say, like, you are my grandmother, I'm only your grandchild, I can't do your job, I can't take your place. And, I tried, but, I give your fate back to you. And I know that you're strong enough to carry that fate on your own. And thank you for living the life that you did so that I could be here now. That's some of the way that you can bring back order to things.
Wow.
Mhm.
So with family constellations, how far back in the lineage can you go? Or like, are you able to like intuitively tap in, or just like strict facts, like whatever the person knows about their family tree?
Usually you go back up to 3 generations. Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes you also can put up like countries, like if there was a lot of wars or immigrations, you can put representatives in for the country. So constellation is often done in person in a group. And then let's say like, I'm working on an issue and there's a facilitator, like, leading the group, and I'm sitting in the, hot seat, and I want to work on an issue that I have maybe with relationships. Then we'll put up select family members if the facilitator is maybe through the conversation kind of can see what side of the family is probably most affected by the traumas. And then we choose representatives of those family members to be in the center of the circle. And we watch how the energy is moving. I noticed that the American way of family constellation that I've seen is a little bit more verbal, whereas I was trained by a German teacher who was also a student of Osho, the enlightened mystic, and he has a very meditative approach. So we mostly worked in silence until the end when we were doing like resolution and healing statements. So we simply watched how the energy is moving. So oftentimes anyone who is deceased in the system will fall to the ground, but a lot of times children will try to take on the fate of someone who's experienced a tragedy that's affecting the whole family. So they'll lie down too. So sometimes you'll see living members, lying down as if they're dead. They've lost their life force because they've tried to replace, those other people. Yeah.
So powerful. Yeah, I shared this before we were recording. Like, I've heard of it. I've never really tapped in, but so would you say it's a type of ancestral healing work?
Yes, I would. Yeah, definitely.
And why, like, what would be the reason for a client to come to you for per se? Like what would be like certain, not symptoms, right? But like,
Mhm.
yeah, certain problems or things people are going through, like you just said, relationship. Could it be like anything?
It could be anything. Yeah. It could be anything. And they just maybe haven't really looked into what they might be carrying from their ancestry. Yeah. And they want to just tap in, using this modality. So I'm not very experienced working with in-person groups, but I have done work with a lot of one-on-ones. And so we use physical objects to represent the members. Yeah, and I kind of continue along with my teacher in his meditative approach. We kind of tune in and tap in And usually I ask the client to do some preparation. I give them a list of all the major events, that may have
Mm.
occurred. And then they make like a family tree or like a traumagram, you can call it. And we start to see like what are the major events in the past 3 generations. And then working on the issue itself during the session, we'll tune in to like what event or events feel most relevant to what's happening. And it's not so obvious sometimes. We pretty much just go where the energy is moving.
Mm. So like you're saying you do more individual. So a group setting, it would be like like it would just be like 5, 6 strangers going through their own family constellation.
Yeah, and representing for each person like their family members. So
Wow.
it's my issue, then you might represent my mother. I, or the facilitator, might choose you to represent my mother. We'll have someone representing my father, my grandfather, whatever feels relevant. And then because of how energy works, like it's neither created nor destroyed, it's always there. And we put up this field, right? And our intention
Mm.
is this is who you are, this is who you're representing. Now you
Mhm.
tune in, and then boom, like you will see so much movement. Like when I first got trained, it was in Turkey. That was my level 1 training, a 10-day training, and I did level 2 in Spain, another 10 days. So in each of those groups of maybe 30 to 50 people, most were like more than half would be Turkish in Turkey, and more than half would be Spanish in Spain, and then a bunch of international people. And so I could also see like just how much trauma this planet has experienced and how each group of people have their own particular traumas, and I saw, probably like, like a couple dozen constellations in each training. And you could just see before your eyes, just like what people are carrying in their lineage, it was like, whoa. It was also it was a big learning for me too, to like really see multidimensionally and beyond the surface of what people and families are presenting. We're all coming together for this workshop and training for the purpose of healing. So everyone's very open and intentional, not putting on any fronts or masks. And you see the rawness of like what we've experienced on this planet. Like it was in the beginning, it was a little hard for me to like handle. Like I was pretty overwhelmed, like the first couple of days, to see that energy moving.
I can feel it in my body. It's like because wow, I didn't realize that part that it's like actors, right? Like if you and I and like 4 other people are in that room, right? I
Mhm.
will represent an ancestor of yours. And then
Mhm.
just to like go into that meditative state and like have that energy of that person come
Yeah.
through.
Yeah. It's more like channeling, I would say,
Yeah.
because you don't have a
And
script.
wow. And then to feel, right? Because it's like even us, right? There's 2 of us here
Mhm.
talking and
Mhm.
and conversing, right? And then there's thousands of ancestors before
Yeah.
us. So it's like I could feel, and before we recorded, I was telling Stephanie, I'm like, this is such a beautiful conversation, and thank you for bringing your wisdom because we're in the season of fall, we're in the season of autumn, and it's, the honoring our ancestors and honoring all those who came before us. It gets really, I don't say dense, but it gets moves to the forefront during this time of year.
Mhm.
So, what was I going to say? Yeah, wow. It's so deep. It's like, yeah, I'm just thinking of also the connection, right? Because of the world we live in, and I'd love to hear your opinion, right? The world we live in, where we tend to live far away from our families, right? We tend to be spread out. There's not a sense of like family community, especially in the US at least, right? So that culture of the grandparents being around the grandchildren, and we have this lack of community. So do you feel like that's influencing even more of that perpetuation of trauma throughout the lineage?
Yeah, I do think so. And like on the hopeful note, I feel that like our consciousness is like growing and our awareness is deepening and our recognition, also because of the scientific studies that have now been done, like in the field of epigenetics and how, these traumas are carried on like next generations. Like I think before these studies were done, people might not think that that was even relevant, something that happened to my grandparents or my great grandparents, but now we actually see it in the studies that, yep, even if you were not exposed to that trauma going back a few generations, it's still living inside of your body and you're still expressing that original trauma, even if you didn't touch it yourself. So on the hopeful note, I think that people are more seeking understanding of where they come from, of their roots, especially if in places like America they've been dislodged from their roots. There's so much like immigration. This is a country of immigrants. Yeah, it is. It's a country of immigrants from the beginning. Not, I won't get into that, but so yeah, there's been a lot of cutting off of roots on so many different levels, for the indigenous people here as well. And so the history of war and colonization all over the planet has really disrupted, this connection. And so I think with our growing awareness, a lot of people are starting to feel that like, where do I come from? And maybe some of the difficulties I'm experiencing now have to do with my disconnection. And maybe I didn't know my grandparents. Like I didn't know my grandparents. Neither of my maternal nor my paternal grandmothers were alive when I was born. And then my grandfathers were in Hong Kong and Taiwan, and I didn't meet them until I was already like a grown adult. I think I saw one of them a couple times in my life, but they weren't like a presence. So when I went to my first Family Constellations workshop, because I told her that I literally just didn't know really where I came from. My parents didn't talk much about it at all, like their childhood or their history of where they came from. And, there was a lot of war in their history, like Taiwan. My dad his family was in Taiwan for a few generations, but Taiwan was colonized by the Japanese for 100+ years. So his father grew up in speaking Japanese and in a Japanese education system, even though he's, in Taiwan. And then in China, there was the civil war between the communists and the nationalists in the 1940s, in addition to Japan invading China. And so my mom's parents fled when she was like 1 year old to Hong Kong. So there's like, there's war everywhere, like in our lineage. So my parents didn't talk about it. So when I went to my first workshop, we just put up my whole family, like back 3 generations, including Taiwan, Hong Kong, and the United States. And she didn't even really have them do much, except she had me walk through and like meet everyone as for the first time, basically. And that was like the beginning of me connecting to my roots in a deeper way. And, of course, the purpose of that is for healing, for grounding, for setting a foundation that was never really built in my system,
That survival, right? That imbalanced root chakra, right? War, famine, fleeing, that a lot of immigrants face in all different scenarios and countries. And yeah, how did that feel for you to connect for the first time?
It was very moving, like almost to the point of overwhelming, like because it just was like, man, I don't know these people. Like I really don't know these people, but I come from them, although I think in my soul path, I had a desire always to get to this place of like being the connector, like for my family, because, I chose to study Buddhism. I chose to live in China and Taiwan, where both of, my lineage is. I chose to learn the language, even though my parents didn't speak to me in Chinese. They spoke to me in English. But like in college, I consciously chose to study Chinese and then, go live in China. So I was always trying to connect back, even though my parents would have been totally satisfied if I never did, and just became fully Americanized. But that's not what I wanted to do. Like I was drawn to my
Mm.
roots. So, yeah, like, and that I guess brought me to Family Constellations. Like that's why I was doing all of this, and like before that workshop, I sat my parents down for the first time and asked them to like tell me like about their family and like what are the major events that occurred, like who's who, like, and I made a family tree. That's where I learned all like a lot of information for the first time.
Wow. Do you feel like your own healing has affected your family, like your immediate family?
I think so, I don't really know, but like I said, I think if I had never went on this path and just became fully Americanized, like that would have been satisfactory to them. Like
Mm.
no one digging into the past, like why think about the past? But for me, I felt like I needed to, in order to feel myself, to like understand myself. Like I just had to fill in these gaps, and these places of silence and repression.
Yeah. And I've heard somewhere too, or maybe maybe it's just my intuition as well. It's like anyone doing the ancestral healing, right? Our immediate family, they might not be on board with us or like on the same path as us this lifetime, but their DNA, right? Their soul blueprint, like will remember. And sometimes it won't show up this lifetime, but like that healing will show up in future lifetimes for them. And
Mhm.
it's, ooh, it's so deep, Stephanie. Like, I didn't know so much about family constellation, and it my heart is just like, whew, because I also can feel all of our ancestors with us, like proud. And those of you
Mhm.
listening to this podcast, like so many of us have chosen to be the lineage, um, to create a new legacy for our lineages and
Mhm.
to take the strengths, right? Because our ancestors have so many strengths. They have so much wisdom and knowledge, right? That's running through our veins, right? And then to transmute all the war, all the violence, all the
Mhm.
rape, all the pillage, all that. And it's a big, it's a big incarnation that a lot of us chose, right?
Yeah.
No one's good or bad for not choosing lineages that have a lot of trauma, but it's deep work. And yeah, I just feel called to share for anyone listening, like so many of your ancestors are proud of you right now, right? It's work that's not really, well, maybe until we like pass over, but it's not work that's celebrated in this lifetime. I almost feel like, does that
Mhm.
make sense?
I think so. Like I keep thinking like my parents probably wish I never dug into this, and they don't even know why. Like we gave you everything. We worked so hard.
Mm,
You just not think about the past, and just move on. Like we literally gave you all the education, like you had a good life. It was a struggle for them, but like I never felt like I, was missing something or destitute or something like that, and so for them, in a way, I feel like I was a disappointment. And that's kind of a lot of
mm,
one of my personal challenges and hurdles, like to be doing this work or walking this path when the family, like my entire family, is like, what are you doing and why? You know, why can't you just be
what is
normal?
she doing? Yeah, yeah. And playing that both sides, right? I could see, right, where that comes from as well. Like my mom emigrated from Colombia when she was 7 years old. She's never desired to go back. She's never desired, she's like, we were poor. Like, why would I want to go back to that? Or why would I want to, she shared some stories, right? But it's like that imbalanced root chakra, that survival, that like, yeah, like why would you want to talk about this? Like, let's move on. Let's,
Mhm.
but that's,
Mhm.
like you said before, one, gaslighting ourselves, right, and our lineage, and also um moving forward, right, we're going to take on those energies either, for our own selves, for our children, for our
Mhm.
partners, right? Because everything, oh,
Mhm.
that's like a good, like when
Mhm.
you're in partnership. So you're
Mhm.
like coming in with four lineages.
Mhm. Mm.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's a
Have,
lot.
wow. Have you done work with couples before?
I haven't done work with couples as a facilitator. I've been in a few couples, like been in relationships, and the major relationship I was in when I was learning all of this and doing a lot of the major healing of this was my Israeli partner. And so he's also carrying very strong and also heavy lineage. Um, and I saw that playing out in many different ways. Um, and I feel like that was like a big relationship where I was also just playing out, yeah, what my parents had passed down to me, and the way that they were often in conflict growing up. And I would see some of these energies move through me, and I would almost
Mhm.
feel like, wow, like, what is this? This is like, this energy doesn't even feel like myself. Like, I feel kind of crazy. Like, what am I saying? What am I feeling? What is this force moving through
Ooh,
me?
can
Yeah.
resonate. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was like 6 years of that, and, like, it lightened up a lot. Like, I think I look at that relationship as a huge karmic relationship. Like, my ex, that the Israeli man, he, like, used to not like when I would say that I thought it was a karmic relationship, like, for the purpose of healing, he's like, "No, like, I don't want it to be like that." I don't really understand why he didn't like that, but, like, I always saw the higher purpose of it. And, looking back, I don't carry a lot of those energies in me because we played them out so much with our eyes open. At least I had my eyes open, like really, really being diligent about trying to like release this from my system.
Mm.
Yeah. So,
Ooh. Yeah, that makes sense. Like, I've been in conflict, and so many of us too, right? We're in the conscious community, right? It's like a lot of us were not raised with healthy conflict, right? Conflict isn't bad, but it's how are we coming to it, right? How are we? And then, yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I've had moments too in my life where I'm like, this doesn't, I feel like I'm possessed, or like
yes.
something is coming over me. And then I come out of it and you're like, what just happened? Or I'm so sorry. And that that makes sense. So you feel like when you're playing it out and then you become aware of it, like that's where like the healing happens.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like the awareness is where the healing happens. Yes.
Like
Yeah.
shifting, because that's also right, every time we make a new decision, right, there are
Mhm.
neurons in our brains that like shift, right? So it's like we aren't playing out the same way as our parents, or the same way
Mhm.
as our our parents are only playing that out because of our grandparents or our great
Right.
grandparents.
Right. Hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
And the thing about constellation work is sometimes you even see like who each member is really being quote unquote possessed by, like sometimes they're identifying with like a perpetrator in the system, or they're identifying with an outcasted family member from a couple of generations back, who yeah was outcasted for any reason. Could be like a illness. Sometimes like family members get outcasted. Could be they maybe were criminals, and like maybe
Mm.
lost the family fortune. There's all different reasons. And so we also look at family secrets, like who's no one talking about,
Wow.
because again, someone has to take on that energy, because systems are always moving toward wholeness, like you can't truly leave anyone out, So someone's always going to be trying to take on that energy for the purpose of like bringing that wholeness to the system, you know? So yeah, constellation work is really, really cool to see like what's really going on. And again, the purpose is awareness. Like it's just to acknowledge what hasn't been acknowledged. That's it. Like that's the simplest way to put it.
And like sometimes that's enough, right? Like
That is enough. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
right, it's as simple and as complex as that. It's like sometimes just having, and this goes for so many things and modalities, right? Like having the awareness of something is enough to transmute it or heal it.
Mm-hmm.
How did you find family constellations? Like how did it spark you?
There was a male therapist in Israel that I somehow got connected with. Maybe I did one or two couples sessions with him. And I remember looking at his bio and seeing that he was trained in family constellations. I think that was my first one. I mean, probably was a little earlier, but I think that's how I found my teacher, at least. Like I saw he was trained by this teacher, and I was like, I trusted him, and I thought he was like a person of depth, the therapist. So I was like, okay, if he trained with this teacher, then I want to look into this teacher. And so I did. That's how I found. Yes, Spagito Liebermeister is the one who trained me in family constellations.
And for anyone listening, with these sessions, is it kind of like a few sessions? Can it bring awareness in one session? Does it depend on the person and like how much trauma they're moving through?
Mhm. Yeah, well, I think like the healing is always in layers. So as many sessions is great, but also with family constellations, I call them ancestral empowerment sessions. And I usually have done those in single sessions of 90 minutes with preparation work beforehand, like a week to of preparation work. And then that's enough for a lot of people, to like bring some resolution and yeah, settle things in their system. Um, and then of course there's always more to do if we wanted to, like in my ongoing sessions with clients, like clients who work with me for a longer period of time, we work on many different levels over many sessions. But usually only one to three or four will focus on the ancestry. And then it's more about, how things are moving through them. Yeah.
And is it usually like one topic, like say money, right? Like scarcity of money, is that like usually, or is it kind of an umbrella, like in whatever comes up?
Yeah. Well, my teacher taught me that the client should always be presenting with a certain issue that they're being challenged by, because that gives a point of focus. And he says that otherwise you're kind of just curious and you're just like, and he just
What's
wasn't
this
into that. He was
modality?
like, yeah, he was like, don't do it out of curiosity, because then you might get attached to stories. You might be wanting something dramatic, but like if you're coming with something that's an issue for you, then you have a point of focus. So he said, never do it just out of curiosity, because then maybe the mind gets involved too much or expectations come in. So I always ask that they come with a specific issue. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So deep, Stephanie. Wow. That's like, I felt it. I felt like for half of our episode, there was just so much
Yeah.
energy, so many ancestors around us.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's powerful work. So thank you for doing this work. It's
Mm-hmm.
ooh, I know we've talked about this before. How can let's talk, how can someone also just tap in to their ancestry in general, right? Like how can they
Mm-hmm.
feel more connected?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I always go to the family constellation approach, which is to just look at the 3 generations back and just acknowledge every member. You can ask your family, like, what major events may have occurred, like, And it's really about acknowledging every single person and giving everyone their proper place and honoring their proper place in the lineage. That's it. It's really acknowledgement and honoring, and then knowing that everyone has to carry their fate or their destiny on their own, and you can't do it for them. So when you give everyone their proper place, you also release entanglements, or
Mm,
identification with anyone that you shouldn't be identified with. And it brings you back to your own energy, your own
mm.
presence as a unique soul.
Wow. So an entanglement, for those who might not know what that is.
Mhm. It's when you're identifying with someone that's not you. Like you're identifying with the energy of your mother, but you're not separating yourself as a unique individual. You're being wrapped up in whatever she might be carrying, but you
Mm,
have to disentangle. You have to remove your energy from that so that each of you can be in your own center and walk your own path. So a lot of times with my clients, like I do something as simple as saying, like, and acknowledging, I am, like, so for me, I would say, I am Stephanie. I am a woman different from my mother. I am
mm.
Stephanie. I am a woman separate from my mother. And you could even say her name. I'm a woman separate from Margaret, just to start like coming back to your proper identity. A lot of issues, like other teachers I've studied with as well, this French one in particular I'm thinking of, a lot of times, like when we have different ailments, headaches, accidents, things like that, it's usually because we're identified with someone else. That's not us. Yeah.
Really? Oh my God.
Mhm. Yeah. We're just not grounded in our own identity. Yeah. So I think he was the one who actually taught me to use those kind of statements.
Mm, really powerful. Yeah.
Mhm.
Wow. It's like,
Mhm.
oh, I am my own, right?
Mhm.
And yeah, because of all the ancestors that come before us, there are things that we are, yeah, moving through that isn't ours. So that makes sense. Ooh,
Mhm.
we could talk about this
Mhm.
for days because I'm so intrigued. I'm just like, this is so fascinating. And it's reminding me, I think we talked about it a couple of weeks ago. I did an ancestral ceremony with my partner, and I was calling in like my great grandparents. For the first time, I uttered my great grandmother's name.
Mhm.
And literally the next day, I saw her name on a license plate. And I'm like,
Wow.
holy, like, she's like, yeah, thank
Uh-huh.
you. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
finally, lady.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so it's, yeah, anyone listening, it's, if you're called to it, right? Not all of us are called to it, but if you are called to it, it's really
Mhm.
important work, and
Yeah.
not just healing for ourselves, but yeah, for our whole family tree. So
Mhm.
yeah, wow. Thank you, Stephanie, for sharing your wisdom and being here in your groundedness. What, first off, where can people find you?
So people can find me via my website, www.stephanielyralin.com. Instagram is the same handle, at Stephanie Lyra Lin. And I also want to say, for the women who might be interested in, you know, exploring their ancestry for the purpose of healing and growth, I have a free workshop that I taught called Feminine Lineage Empowerment. So they could just get in contact with me through my website or Instagram. Um, and I'll just send you the preparation for the workshop, and then you can view the workshop, and that'll give you a lot right there. If
Mm,
any men are listening, you can contact me and we can set up a one-on-one ancestral empowerment session, women too, if you want to do that work. Um, yeah, so just for the ancestral family constellations aspect, that's how I can offer some more support.
beautiful. And then do you have any offerings coming up?
I do. I have an offering for women. It's a group journey. I love leading groups. It's been a couple years since I've done this. So I have a 4-month virtual journey coming up for women who are offering their work in service to, our evolution, our healing, our growth. So healers, coaches, spiritual leaders, healing artists of all kinds. If you're a woman and you want to be held in a container, we're going to be about 8 women over 4 months, meeting every other week to support each other, to grow. I'm going to be offering coaching as well. We're going to be doing some ancestral healing as well. It's going to be an intimate journey to really liberate your soul codes and infuse that more coherently into your work in the world. Yeah.
Amazing.
So that's my group offering. Yes. And I also offer one-on-one journeys. I have an 8-week journey and a 6-week journey, especially for women who are really wanting to like balance their masculine and feminine, also work through, any heaviness that they might be carrying from the past. A lot of times it manifests in the womb, so I work with women who are struggling with like womb pain, different like issues related to the ovaries. That's kind of like a special interest of mine to sort of like holistically address the roots of these different like physical ailments in women.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Such powerful work. Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this was great. Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Of course.